But as you're going there, and as you also kind of get ready to go to 1 Peter chapter 2 in a little bit, which is where we're going to be spending most of our time, I need you to go down memory lane with me. Down my memory lane. Your memory lane is your lane. I need you to go down mine with me. And I need you to appreciate, and students, you won't appreciate this, that I have reached a certain age in my life where I begin to give unsolicited information, right? No one asked to know this, but I will give it at the drop of a hat. And it's a certain type of information. And it starts with this. I remember when that used to be, fill in the blank, all right? And you do not need to ask me to give you that information. I will just say it now, all right? And I grew up in Euless, which is not too far from here, just south between Fort Worth and Dallas. And I was on Facebook, another thing that speaks to what generation I'm in and what generation I'm not in. But someone had posted a bunch of old pictures of just the city. And they're not impressive pictures. They're not anything spectacular or really of note. But if you grew up there and you saw that, you're like, oh, that sends me back. That takes me back. And so I'm going to show you a few pictures, and then you're just going to have to imagine my feelings. And this one is just from Google Maps. This is nothing special. Nothing special about this, right? It is Planet Fitness / Family Dollar, which that's an interesting combo. I feel like it's really smart if there's a doorway in there because you could go from treadmill to donut and out the door. I think that's smart. But when I was in middle school, it used to be this, which was the best place to get your candy for Halloween or your just candy in general. I don't know if those even exist anymore because I think the only thing that you can buy for 99 cents is Arizona tea. So it would just be an Arizona tea store. But the thing that really got me was the picture I saw which showed what it looked like when I was a kid, which was this. Does anyone even know what a Food Lion is? Some of you, yes. And this is where the generational divides are drawn. And they still exist somewhere like in Virginia and South Carolina, I think. But my mom, I was talking to her about this, and I showed her that, and she just goes, I still have your receipt from your first birthday cake from there. And I'm like, that's a little obsessive. That's cool. That's a step above just my first lock of hair, And so... but then there was another one I saw, and so this is a picture today. It's just a Science Academy. I don't necessarily know what that means, but I see it, and every time I see it and drive by it, I see what it used to be. Yes, you're looking. Oh, I like that one caused audible pain. From some of you, I heard, ooh, like that hurt, either because you missed it or you're like, oh, I'm right there with you, okay? And then there's another one, and this picture is not going to be as, clear. These are both just from Google Maps. There's this building, completely uninspired, nothing exciting about it. They've added some stuff to it, and it used to be holy ground. It used to be this. Yes. Do you know how many times I rented The Legend of Zelda from that location? Because I don't. It was a lot on the Nintendo 64. And so so you see all these things, and you see just how much stuff changes. But you often don't appreciate or even recognize those changes until you're gone for a little bit. Or until someone brings it to your attention. Hey, remember when? Hey, remember when? And so whenever you leave home for a bit and you go back, the changes become very obvious. Another one that I don't have a picture of was there was an old Methodist church that was like a landmark. It was like a cultural landmark, and now it's a quick trip. And it's just like, that seems like an indictment of our society. But anyway, I just remembered seeing all of these differences and just being like, wow. But there's also another layer of sort of nostalgia you get. It's whenever you go back to your house, whenever you go back to your childhood home. And you might see certain things that really kind of speak to you on a nostalgic level where you just have warm, fuzzy feelings. But there's other things that you notice as if it was your first time. You're like, why did we ever do that? Why were we ever okay with that? You might notice the cabinet doors stick and you have to pull them real hard in order to get them to open, but it was just something that you were used to growing up. Or there's that one pothole, you knew how to swerve around it. It was fine. Why get it fixed? You know it in the dark, right? And so there's all these things about home that until you leave it for a bit, you don't pay attention to or notice. And so today, what I wanted to talk on was having a perspective of an international missionary at home. Because whenever you go onto the mission field, whenever you go on an international mission trip, short-term or long-term, you quickly are hyper-observant of everything going on. and you become a quick student of the culture around you, and you become aware of how the church is doing in the way that it corresponds with and reacts to and engages with the culture it exists in. And then you come back home and you take those same tools, that same perspective, and you apply it because now you kind of feel like you're showing up for the first time or you've been away from home for a long time. And so what would it look like for us? What would it look like for us today if we tried to adopt an international missionary mindset here? Or I'll put it another way. How would we act, how would we engage with our culture as an individual, as individuals and as a body if we saw ourselves as missionaries on a foreign field? Because we are. This is not home. This is just where we are. And we see that in 1 Peter in particular, that is something that we need to get our minds around. But we also see in 1 Thessalonians the importance of having an outside perspective, being able to report on the health and progress of a church. If we go back to 1 Thessalonians 3, 1 through 6, Paul was writing, "Finally, when we could stand it no longer, we decided to stay alone in Athens, and we sent Timothy to visit you. He is our brother and co-worker in proclaiming the good news of Christ. We sent him to strengthen you, to encourage your faith, and to keep you from being shaken by the troubles you were going through. But you knew that we are destined for such troubles. Even while we were with you, we warned you that troubles would soon come, and they did, as you well know. That is why, when I could no longer bear it, I sent Timothy to find out whether your faith was still strong, and I was afraid that the tempter had gotten the best of you, and that our work had been useless. But now Timothy has just returned, bringing us the good news about your faith and love, and he reported that you always remember our visit with joy and that you want to see us as much as we want to see you." Let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you so much that you have given us so many examples in Scripture and even examples in people that we know that can help us get an outside perspective onto how we're doing. Give us an outside perspective on our health and our progress, and to be able to encourage us to go in the right direction. Help us to be able to get that same mindset and see ourselves as missionaries on a foreign field. In Jesus' name, amen. So, Paul is in this great position whenever he is writing to the Thessalonians to be able to say, hey, from the outside looking in, here's how you're doing. And he sends Timothy. But he sends Timothy to mainly be an encouragement, right? He sends him to be someone who's going to edify and to help them out in case they had been stumbling because they have been getting persecuted and have had troubles. And so that should be the first thing we're doing. Like, we hope to encourage and we hope to build up. And sometimes, though, whenever we're looking at things from an outside perspective, you get that critical eye. Because keep in mind, it's a little bit of an anomaly for Paul to be writing to a church that is doing well. Like, you read, I always talk about Galatians versus Romans. You can get almost everything in the book of Romans in Galatians in half the time because he is angry. Like, he is furious with how they're doing. And the reports back to him are not good. And so you get this outside perspective looking at how things are doing, because when you're in it, when you're in the situation, when you're in the context, sometimes you don't easily see how things are doing because it's just normal to you. You don't think about the cabinet doors sticking and having to pull them real hard to open them. That's just something you've always done. I always think that about my cars that I've had. My first car was a 2001 Pontiac Bonneville. It had the turn radius of a small yacht. And there were so many quirks to it that you just got used to. And I didn't share this first hour. Y'all get this one. There was a really weird problem with it in that their battery was underneath the back seat and was loose. And sometimes if I got someone in my car, it would make the battery not work, and the car would just start like giving up the ghost while I'm driving. And so eventually I figured out how to do this. And basically, a person would have to give my car chest compressions by bouncing on the back seat. And so we'd be going down the highway and things start freaking out. And, my friend's like, is the car dying? I go, jump! What do you mean? Jump up and down. And, like, it would bring the car back to life. And I would not explain it to anyone. I would not explain to them what just happened. They would just be like, that's the weirdest thing, and I'm never driving with you again. And so then I got a newer car after that one broke down for the final time. And it's just like, oh, wow, this is the life. No one has to give my car CPR. This is great. And you get used to those things because you're in it, but then whenever you have like guests over, you become very aware of the problem because you know people are looking, or you get into that car for the first time yourself and you see things with that perspective. So we need that outside perspective sometimes. It helps us stay healthy, it helps us know when we're doing well, and it also helps us know whenever we have places that we need to improve. So what we're going to try to do is we're going to try to put on the international missionary eyes and goggles for our context and just try to see how we would change in the way that we as a church engage with the culture around us. What are we doing well? And what can we be more missional in? 1 Peter 2, starting in verse 9, I think Peter really kind of gets at this, and he hits one key important thing that we need to remember in order to make this a reality. In talking about how others are like living in sin and being stumbling blocks, he says, "But you are not like that, for you are a chosen people. You are royal priests, a holy nation, God's very own possession. As a result, you can show others the goodness of God, for he called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. Once you had no identity as a people, now you are God's people. Once you received no mercy, now you have received God's mercy." And then 11 and 12 is where I wanted to really hone in. "Dear friends, I warn you as temporary residents and foreigners to keep away from worldly desires that wage war against your very souls. Be careful to live properly among your unbelieving neighbors. Then, even if they accuse you of doing wrong, they will see your honorable behavior, and they will give honor to God when he judges the world. And for the Lord's sake, submit to all human authority, whether the king as head of state or the officials he has appointed, for the king has sent them to punish those who do wrong and to honor those who do right. It is God's will that your honorable lives should silence the ignorant people who make foolish accusations against you." Okay, so temporary residents and foreigners. That's a part to underline, whatever way your translation words it, that we need to kind of try to put on that mindset. That even though you might have a house here, that this is not your home. Even though you may be here right now and that you would note that you are a Texan or American or that you are a resident of Flower Mound or Copper Canyon, you could say that, but realize that your citizenship, your true citizenship is in heaven, and that we are temporary residents and foreigners here, and that you are on a foreign mission field. Now, I would encourage everyone to go on an international mission trip. Long-term, short-term, I do encourage everyone to do that for the sake of the gospel primarily, but a residual benefit of that is that it helps you get an outside perspective whenever you come back home, which I think is crucial in regards to being able to live out your faith with excellence. So let's look at our culture, our church, with fresh eyes, and we're going to look at it as if it was a house. We're going to look at this and try to imagine looking at these things for the first time. We're going to analyze our neighborhood. We're going to analyze the living room, the dining room, the front yard, and our address. We're going to try to see with fresh eyes what it's like to engage with our culture through those lenses. So the first one, the neighborhood. So one of the things that Peter says is just make the most, that you would live wisely amongst your unbelieving neighbor. But in order to do that, you must first actually do life with your unbelieving neighbor and know what your unbelieving neighbor believes. You need to be able to actually understand what it is and how that they believe and how to relate to them. Because when you are a missionary, I've been told, you have to become a student of the culture. You kind of have to understand and learn what it is that are acceptable, normal practices, things that are good, things that are impolite or improper. You need to be able to understand those things, but also understand what it is that, what worldview exists around you, what worldview is held by the people in your neighborhood. Paul was really good at this. In Acts 17, one of my favorite passages, he's in Athens, and he's walking through, and he makes some observations about their worldview. It says, while Paul was waiting for them in Athens, he was deeply troubled by all the idols he saw everywhere in the city. He went to the synagogue to reason with the Jews and God-fearing Greeks, and he spoke daily in the public square for all who happened to be there, because at Mars Hill, at the Acropolis, they could just exchange philosophies and ideas freely amongst each other, and everyone came to listen to the new things being said. In verse 22, so Paul, standing before the council, addressed them as follows: Men of Athens, I've noticed that you are very religious in every way, not a compliment. For as I was walking along, I saw your many shrines, and one of your altars had this inscription on it: to an unknown God. Sort of the catch-all in case we forgot to worship a God. Hopefully this covers our bases type of God. This God whom you worship without knowing is the one I'm telling you about. He is the God who made the world and everything in it. And since he is Lord of heaven and earth, he doesn't live in man-made temples, and human hands can't serve his needs, for he has no needs. He himself gives life and breath to everything, and he satisfies every need. So he was able to quickly draw the comparisons between what he believes and what they believe, his worldview and their worldview, and to say, here's how mine is better. You are saying, here's the story that this worldview is giving, and here's how the gospel is a better story. Not just a different one, but in what ways is this superior? You've got small gods that need you. I've got a big God that you need. So he's able to make those comparisons and help understand and to present the better story. But in order to do that, you have to be a student of the culture around you. And our culture is changing all the time, right? Like it changes on itself, and it doesn't even realize that it's doing it. And so it's kind of like, what does it believe? What does it believe is absolutely right? I don't know. It's kind of hard to hold on to that because it's like trying to hold water sometimes. But even that is something to understand. That is something to appreciate, that there's this transient morality that sometimes exists in our culture that people don't even realize themselves, and that we have to make sure that we don't adopt that same thing accidentally just because we exist in this culture. It's also important to be able to understand how people operate, what are the ways that are effective ways of communicating, because you could have certain words that you say, certain things that you say, that make sense to you, but they don't understand that Christian jargon or terminology. You could talk about love, and you understand the agape love that is God, that theos and agape, God is love, and then you could be confronted with what the world says, and that it is co-opted by the LGBTQ community saying that love is love. And so you've got the same vocabulary, but a different dictionary. And so you need to be able to make sure that you are listening to and understanding the ways that other people might be using words that are even in the Bible in order to understand where some correction and consideration needs to be taken. But also just maybe certain social practices, because sometimes whenever we are in our own circle and in our own crew, we don't realize when we're weird. I don't know how to say that. Or whenever we are saying things that might be considered uncouth or impolite. Or whenever there's great opportunities to show amazing love and compassion that people are hungry for, and we don't realize that they are ready to accept that. Whenever I spent a very short amount of time in Tanzania, I noticed quickly that like all the grown men were walking around pinky and pinky, and I'm like, what's going on? Like I was very confused, and my translator just said, oh, that's just a sign of friendship, just, walking around pinky and pinky, grown men just doing that. I'm like, okay, that's interesting. And so after being there for about 2 weeks, I really connected with one of my translators, Faith, great guy, and we're walking down the road talking about Jesus, talking about life and aspirations, and he does this, and I go, when in Rome, and so here I am. This is normal. This is great. The other one that got me more out of my comfort zone, though, and you really have to, it's good to have someone kind of with you to help sort of like help you understand what is and is not acceptable, is we show up to one of the churches and we were supposed to do a Bible study, and no one's there. And have I told this group the story about me helping dig a grave? Nope. Here we go. And they say that one of the elders in the village had died the night before, and that we were going to go preach the gospel at the funeral. And I go, okay, that's not, okay, yes, all right, let's do it. And so we go and I learn a lot about the cultural practices for this particular group of people. We go to the house, and all of the women and the widow are wailing in the house. And so they said, we need to give her some money, which I think is, by the way, an excellent practice and considerate thing that you would go to a funeral and say, how can I contribute? That's just a side note. I really liked it. But the other thing is I didn't realize that there was going to be a body with its eyes open in the room. And I'm just like, don't look. Don't look. And so we talked to her for a little bit, tried to minister to her a little bit, and then we leave. And she was very accepting and very happy to see us and very interested in anything we had to say. We go back outside. There's a big fire roaring, and then there's a line of men, And my translator says, let's get in line. I go, okay, what's the line for? He's like, we're going to help dig a grave. And I go, okay. And so I get in the line, and then I start seeing this happen. And so they're all kind of whispering, and then the line moves, and all of a sudden, I'm at the front of the line, and they wanted, I don't know if they were just curious or what, but they handed me a tool, and I jump in. And immediately I start doing what I think was correct, and then I've got like 15 men yelling at me in Swahili that I am doing this wrong. And so I fix my strategy. Apparently, someone told me later that I was about to be buried if I kept digging the way I was digging. I go, thanks, guys. And then after doing that for a little bit, they pull me out, and then the next shift goes in. And a person looks at me and says, okay, tell us what you came to tell us. After I had already, and kind of by force, had realized what was the most culturally appropriate thing to do, and then got out of my comfort zone in order to go do it, without compromising any morality. None of that compromised my faith in order to do that. They listened to the gospel, and 70 people accepted Christ. And so we have to make sure that we are constantly remaining students of our own culture, because we've been in it long enough. Sometimes we think that there's all that we need to know is already there, when in reality we have a hugely diverse culture. So you can talk to anyone and go anywhere in your neighborhood, and you'll probably find a bunch of different worldviews. And then try to figure out how all of that coexists. But in order to do that, you actually have to get out into your neighborhood. And so whenever you are out, you go to from an environment that is used to being out in the neighborhood, you're on the mission field, you understand the importance of being able to understand the context, to ask questions of the context around you, to get people thinking about their own beliefs and worldview, and then presenting them with a better worldview in the gospel. You actually have to engage with people and know what they believe in order to make that happen. And so be like Paul, be like him, being willing to go out there, being willing to learn, and then being willing to boldly and lovingly engage in that conversation. But sometimes you need to kind of step outside of your context and then look in order to see how you're doing with that. Because some of you I know are amazing at doing that. I actually asked a family who goes here, Casey and Ashley Roberts, about what does it mean to have an international mindset, because their family were missionaries in Zambia for a number of years. And they said that when we learned to stop treating our friends like a project or a metric, the relationships grew naturally and they began to feel like part of our family. We engaged constantly in their communal culture, always sharing food and being in one another's homes. We found true beauty in the way they live, and it was hard returning to a less communal American culture. But we've sought to bring that relational intensity back with us. You actually have to get out into your neighborhood and bring the neighborhood back home. Now, the next room that we have to look at, though, is the dining room, my favorite. It's amazing, and I don't even think of my dining room growing up as the best room. I think of my granny's dining room growing up, because that's where the good food happened, the kind that doesn't count any calories at all. I loved it. And so I think back to every Thanksgiving and Christmas. She had this old table that she bought in 19... and it had leaves. Oh, students. Leaves in a table are pieces of wood that you plop in as you expand the table. I know that doesn't compute to you. Think if you could Lego your table and just kind of add extra pieces. That's what people do. And so we would get all the leaves and expand it because the table was built to be able to accommodate more people. But then there we had more cousins, and they brought their friends over, so we had to go to the shed, get the folding table, wipe it down because it hasn't been used since the previous holiday season, and then get some chairs that also need to be dusted. All the chairs in the house. Got an office chair, a dining chair, a stool, bring it all in. And then if all of those are occupied, then one lucky soul may be able to get the couch in front of the coffee table to watch the Cowboys lose. And so it was a great time had by, I'm kidding, it was 1993, they were winning then. But we were always able to make room. Whenever you're on the outside looking in, you can sometimes see whenever a person is reluctant to make room, or whenever a person is eager to invite people in. Whenever it becomes like a little clique in the social club where it's us four, no more, we don't really have any room left here, versus there's always room. There's always room to be made here at the table. And what does this mean with our culture? Whenever you are in your culture, the differences that seem to divide people seem almost gargantuan and impossible for people to overcome at times. Because you hear about it all the time. You see it in the news. And so the idea of having churches where people of both of these or all of these backgrounds existing together harmoniously sounds like an impossibly daunting task. But if you were an international missionary, those differences and those dividing lines to you do not seem so great, because you understand and are going into things with the understanding that the gospel is greater than and transcends any of those differences and has a great power of unity in the midst of diversity. Matthew Bennett, who was a Middle Eastern, a missionary in the Middle East, who wrote a great book called Hope for American Evangelicals, he noted a couple of things. Firstly, he noted whenever he returned back home, just the sheer scope of racial and ethnic tension in our country, that it seemed like it was impossible to have conversations about it, because every time someone said anything, it seemed like it was a misspeaking and you would be canceled. And so because of that fear to even so much as discuss and engage in things that genuinely impact people, you allow the table to become very homogenous, become very much people of the same, because it's difficult to have those conversations, but the gospel can transcend those things and should be able to bring unity in the face of diversity. He also noted back at home, or back on the mission field, I should say, that the differences that he saw going in did not seem so daunting, and he thought that the Bible gives clear examples to overcome, but to the people that he was working with, no, they were too big to overcome. And he had a person who was another vocational missionary in that culture who had this idea to help get rid of some of the drama in their church. Said that we should have separate churches. A church for the people who are coming from Christian backgrounds who had been persecuted, and the people who are coming from a Muslim or persecuting background over here, because it is just too much baggage to overcome for a persecutor to worship alongside the person they used to persecute. This person has never read the book of Acts, and never has noted whenever Paul was advocated for by Ananias and by Barnabas to be part of the flock. And that, yes, there were those reservations that people may have had, but the gospel transcends that and can bring reconciliation and unity even in the midst of diversity. Another missionary, Leslie Newbegin, who spent many years in the middle of the 20th century in India, noted that while he was there, that there were still painful echoes permeating about the caste system, and that there were people who suggested to him that they should just plant churches from separate castes. In the caste system, depending on how or where you were born, you would be in a different social hierarchy level. And that might not be the best explanation of it. But nevertheless, there are these dividing lines within the culture, and people said it's easier for us to just base the churches off of those dividing lines rather than fight for a unified church that sees us all as part of the one people of God, the one family of God, and it transcends that cultural divide. It's easy from the outsider looking in to say the gospel is big enough, but sometimes whenever we are in our own culture and don't have that international mindset, it is harder to say, I can see where the gospel can conquer. But we need to have that mindset. In fact, it was a thing that they had to fight for in Acts chapter 6. That shows that the Hellenistic Jews, the Jews that had adopted or assimilated some of the Greek culture, and the Hebrew Jewish widows were having different treatment. In verse 1, but as the believers rapidly multiplied, there were rumblings of discontent. The Greek-speaking believers complained about the Hebrew-speaking believers, saying that their widows were being discriminated against in the daily distribution of food. And so they appoint Stephen to bring about a system in order to make sure that everyone is looked out for. Rather than saying, well, maybe it's just easier if we have a people for the Hellenistic Jews and widows over here and people for the Hebraic Jews over here, maybe it'll just be easier for us to divide. Whereas instead, they said, let us resource a way to make sure everyone has a seat at the same table. So whenever you have that international perspective, you get to see what type of dining room you've set up. Does your table have leaves? Are you willing to expand? Are you willing to move furniture? Are you willing to sit on the floor? What is it going to take for everyone to be able to have a seat? Whenever you have that international mindset, you make room. There's always room. Similar to the living room, and we have, or the dining room, we have the living room, where it shows the way we practice what we preach or don't. Now, in order to understand what goes on in the living room, you have to invite people in from the neighborhood on in, right? And so sometimes we just kind of keep people at bay. But the living room shows us whenever we are being hypocritical, whenever we are not living consistently with our beliefs. And you and I are going to be the last people to know when we're being hypocritical, because we put up a bunch of mental roadblocks in our mind to prevent us from being able to go there. And we put up a bunch of defenses so that way we don't have to reckon with the fact that we are not living up to the very standards we hold ourselves or other people to. But that's where that beneficial outside looking in perspective can occur, where we can see that there's that hypocrisy, which means that if you do have someone with that perspective come to you and lovingly and graciously be able to tell you that, consider it, because once again, you're the last person to be able to see that, and hopefully that person is saying it in love. There's a passage here where I hope it was in love, where Paul calls out Peter for being a little racist. Whenever he documents a time whenever he shows favoritism towards the Jews, and he takes steps away from the Gentiles because he cared about their judgment. In Galatians 2, verse 11, but when Peter came to Antioch, I opposed him to his face, for what he did was very wrong. When he arrived, he ate with the Gentile believers who were not circumcised. But afterward, when some friends of James came, Peter wouldn't eat with the Gentiles anymore. He was afraid of the criticism of these people who insisted on the necessity of the circumcision. As a result, other Jewish believers followed Peter's hypocrisy, and even Barnabas was led astray by their hypocrisy. And then it says that he calls them out to his face, which is a total Paul move to do with Peter. I love how the New Testament authors just like to dunk on Peter all the time. You know, John's just like, he cut off a dude's ear, and Paul's just like, he was racist, and like, it's just all of this stuff. And I'm like, but keep in mind, Peter is also the one in Acts chapter 10 who God reveals the message to that this gospel is for the Gentiles as well. And he is faithful and obedient to do that. And so he shows a moment of hypocrisy. And everyone is capable of doing that, and we're usually the last people to notice it in our own lives. Which is why it's so good to surround ourselves with people of an outside perspective who lovingly care enough about us to tell us whenever we're being hypocritical. We just have to lovingly take that criticism and be able to move and do better. Now, also, if you're trying to bring in that outside perspective, remember, Timothy was coming in with an outside perspective, but he wasn't coming just to like say, hey, you're being hypocritical. He came to encourage, and so that should be the first instinctive thing that we're trying to do to begin with. The next place I want to see is the yard. Now, I grew up in an apartment complex, so I didn't really have a yard, but now that I have a yard, I can tell you it's awful. Lawn care is the worst. I cannot stand it. And I have an HOA, which makes it 10 times worse. And so I really do appreciate people who have really nice lawns. And some of these people I see like this is their baby, okay? Like the thing that they're most proud about is, you know, their well-manicured hedges and green grass, and the next is their son, right? It's like very, very, very passionate thing around these parts sometimes. But I think the church in America may be more susceptible than in any other church in the world to try to make itself look really good and think that that is the pinnacle of its obedience. That it cares more about being manicured than it is about being missional. And that's not necessarily, by the way, a bad thing. Like to try to have your churches be excellent, to be performing at their best, to try to have excellence in worship and communication and facilities, none of that is bad. It is bad if you sacrifice being missional on the altar of looking manicured. Because you're trying to look really good, but you're not trying to use any of that good stuff in order to bring people in because you're afraid of what might happen when you do. So that apartment complex I lived at, there was a courtyard right in front of my door, and it was just green grass, and sometimes I would walk across it to go see my friends, and then very quickly a person who worked on the custodial staff would yell at us to get off the grass. And then there was one day we had all watched some wrestling. I don't know who was wrestling who, but we all wanted to reenact it. And one of our friends was allergic to grass, and so I found a wool blanket and put it out on the lawn, and we tried to Hulk Hogan each other on the lawn. And the next day, there was a perfectly square, dead patch of grass. And I just remembered seeing the custodian just looking at it, just wondering, like, he's looking at it like it was like a crop circle. And he's just like, what is this sign? And my parents were like, "Did you do that?" And I was like, "Yeah." They're like, "Okay." We did not. And it grew back a long time later. But anyway, whenever you are doing real life with people, sometimes the manicured facade goes away because now you're too busy trying to just engage with a bunch of people from different walks of life, and they track in mud, and they're not always clean and tidy, and that's okay because Jesus is for everyone. And we want to be able to be an environment that cares more about being good than just looking pretty. And I think that there's a lot of great churches, and that's one of the things I love about Bridgeway, that this seems to be a place where people from all sorts of categories and walks of life can be here and be encouraged to walk towards Jesus and to hear the message of the gospel with grace. So, there's the yard, and then there's the living room, there's the dining room, we've got the neighborhood. There's one other thing that we do need to talk about, and that is our address. Remember, if we go back to 1 Peter, it talks about us being temporary residents and foreigners. That we need to make sure we do not confuse the fact that we exist in this culture as being the same as this is our home. And this is where our primary allegiance is to. We exist here, but this is not home. We are on an international mission field. If you grew up in this town and there's a street named after your grandpa, this is still a place where you are a foreigner on a foreign mission field. Because this is not your home. Your home is with Christ, and you need to be able to take that and apply it to where you're at and make the most of your time here. The other thing is it helps you make sure that you understand where your allegiances lie. Your allegiances are to please God and to make Him known, not to acquiesce or bend to any power structure or into any cultural norms for the sake of being able to blend in. Matthew Bennett, the one I had mentioned before, he talked about one of the things that was very jarring realization to him coming back home. He said, in countries where we'd lived, our brothers and sisters would never assume the government was interested in protecting their freedoms. While there were certain negative aspects to this, they were not tempted to compromise on their values to support a politician in hopes of protection. The freedom not to draw moral conclusions based on party line is affordable to the church who serves at the pleasure of a higher authority. But then keep in mind, what does Peter say after talking about being temporary residents? To respect authority, to honor the emperor, but to be good citizens, so that way in your good behavior you put to rest and silence the ignorance of foolish people. But you don't compromise. You're not compromising or bending what you believe or trying to graft in what they're doing in order to make your beliefs more palatable. And when you arrive on the outside, you can really see whenever those compromises may have taken place, whereas when you're in that culture, it's just normal at that point. Furthermore, whenever you kind of look at this as your place, and then others come here, you kind of put the mentality on that says, what can these people do for me, how they're going to serve me and people like me, and not what can I do to serve them and get down to their level. Not even down to their level. That sounds hierarchical. Get to their level. I like how Paul says it in 1 Corinthians 9:22. Whenever I am with those who are weak, I share their weakness, for I want to bring the weak to Christ. Yes, I try to find common ground with everyone, doing everything I can to save some. Some of your translations may say, be all things to all people. And so, whenever you confuse your address with where your home is, then it changes whether or not you are willing to serve other people or whether you're feeling to be served, and what is the higher power you are willing to swear your allegiance to. And you need to have an international perspective sometimes. That's why it's so helpful that we would be able to communicate with people from all sorts of backgrounds and people on the mission field, because it helps us all sort of, in the middle of the cultural chaos that we exist in, be able to have some sanity because we're able to share with each other what is important. So as we conclude, let's just keep in mind the things that would happen if you have that international missionary perspective, that you're walking from the outside in and looking at the way things are. You would always try to understand and engage and embrace your neighbors and be a student of the culture while remaining a disciple of Christ. You would always know that there's more room at the table, and you would make room if there wasn't some to begin with. You know that unity and diversity is worth the fight, and that you would always try to live consistently with what you say you believe, and you try to keep an open eye for whenever you don't. You would always try to live for the mission rather than maintaining a pretty facade, and you would always remember that this place isn't home, and so you should make the most of your time while you're here. You're just visiting. And so we need to make sure that we're making the most of our time with our unbelieving neighbors. But in order to do that, we have to have the international mindset that gets out of the normal, gets out of the mundane, gets out of what we're used to, and appreciates that you don't have to go on a mission field when you realize that you're already on one. But I do encourage you. Maybe it is good for you to go on an international mission trip, mainly for the sake of spreading the gospel, but also so that way you could be able to converse with and get to know people of the broader, greater, universal church. And so that way we can help each other see with clear eyes and outside perspective. Let's pray.